In my life, there's really only been one car to ever have this on it, and it was actually the first vehicle I ever drove. First vehicle I learned to drive in was a 1990 Chrysler New Yorker 5th Avenue. Okay, so a big boat that was super comfy and had one thing on the front. It had a hood ornament. Every other car we've owned had symbols in the grille or on the hood, but this was the first vehicle we ever owned that had an ornament on the hood. Sure, it was just a tiny little plastic Chrysler emblem, but it was there, and it looked cool, I thought to myself. I'd seen these on Cadillacs and Rolls-Royces before, but this is the first vehicle that I actually got to touch one in front of me, never being to an auto show by the time we owned that vehicle. And I thought to myself, why does this car have it and not every other luxury make? Mercedes was famous for it, but not every car company had them. And where did these come from? And why did they eventually disappear? Today, AutoLooks is going to be taking a look at hood ornaments, or as they were originally called, radiator caps. Welcome back to the AutoLooks podcast. I am your host, as always, the doctor to the automotive industry, Mr. Everett J, coming to you from our host website at autolooks.net. If you haven't been there, stop by, check it out, read some of the reviews, check out some of the ratings, and go to the Corporate Links website page. Big or small, we have them all. Corporate links to every major automotive company's website from around the globe. We're talking these tiny little car companies you never even heard of, from countries you don't even think have cars from them. We have links on the autolooks.net website. And while there, stop by, read some of the reviews, and check out our ratings for all of the end of the year. See how well your vehicle stacks up against the competition on the autolooks.net automotive design ratings. The AutoLooks podcast is brought to you by Ecom Entertainment Group and distributed by podbean.com. If you'd like to get in touch with us, send us an email over at email@autolooks.net. So like I said in the beginning, hood ornaments. We've all seen them. We've all come into contact with them at least once in our life. Because even today, there's still one car company that actually has it. Rolls-Royce, in its spirit of ecstasy, is the only existing hood ornament that you'll still find. There are a few other car companies in existence today that still carry some sort of hood ornament or emblem that sticks out from the top of the vehicle. Honky is another one of these that does this with their red arrow badge, but not a lot of them do it. Hell, Bentley has even shied away from its flying bee. But why is it? Where did they come from? Well, hood ornaments actually predate the automobile by a few thousand years. I'm serious about this. It actually predates the automobile by a few thousand years, with the very first known hood ornament being a sun-crested falcon on Egyptian pharaoh's King Tut's chariot. Yes, the pharaoh, King Tut, one of the most famous pharaohs of all time, is the first known account of what we would call a hood ornament. He put it at the front of his chariot, the sun-crested falcon. He wanted something more than just a standard gold-studded chariot. He wanted to stand out, and he put it there to make his own statement. This is very similar to how hood ornaments eventually started taking over the automotive world. You see, in the early days of the automobile, when the Model T was putting the world on wheels, every vehicle had a radiator in the front. The radiator was made to cool the engine because you didn't want it to overheat. If it overheated, it would blow. So we had a radiator. And on top of that, we had our cap, because eventually you will go through your water and you need to cool the vehicle. At this time, radiators were fully exposed on nearly every single vehicle in existence. And this was because we all had to fill it up. And in the early days, taking the cap off and refilling it was part of owning an automobile. If you're like myself and you sat down and watched the Cars movies or even the Cars shows, you may recount the one episode of Mater's Tall Tales where Mater and Lightning McQueen go back in time and meet Stanley, the man who created Radiator Springs. He was a seller of all kinds of radiator caps, because you have to remember, you had to take it off, put water in to refuel your vehicle. Well, not everybody would remember where they put it. You'd drop it, you'd lose it, you'd leave it behind. So you had to replace them. So somebody like Stanley from the Cars series were around, and they all had different style radiator caps. They made them for all kinds of different vehicles, all different types of radiators. And then someone had the amazing idea, why don't we start adding stuff to our radiator caps? We're going to start branding them. We're going to put our own name on it. Essentially, radiator caps were one of the first aftermarket accessories for automobiles, with you as the owner and the driver of the vehicle having to you replace water within your radiator to keep your engine cool constantly, the likelihood of losing that cap, just like your gas tank cap, possibilities were endless. Now, if you're like myself and you've owned a vehicle at some point in your time where you actually had to take your gas cap off and it wasn't connected like most of them are today by a string or a plastic carrier, you put it up on the trunk lid of your car. And I only did this once, but I drove away. Luckily, my window was down because it was summer, and all I hear is on the ground. And I'm like, crap. Damn it. I forgot to put the cap back on. Well, this is the same context. Your radiator cap. Your radiator cap, you take it off. You put it on top of the hood. Because you remember, you didn't have to open the hood to fill the radiator. It was exposed. All early vehicles did this. And only one car company does this today, and that's Rolls-Royce. Now, there's no need for the radiator. Now it's just a grill to allow air into the engine bay to cool it off. So you don't have to fill the water. Today we have coolant. And coolant you could fill up roughly every few years. You should have it changed because it does get dirty, does get sluggish, and it starts to deteriorate. So it's one of those things that a lot of people don't change. Trust me, I've had cars like almost 300,000 kilometers that I never changed them on. And then I had cars that were over 100,000 kilometers and I'm getting this gross sludge inside of it. And that was my Chevy Malibu, the worst car I ever owned. That's a tale for a different time. This weird sludge would slow it down. It would get burned up and take away for my fluid, so I'd have to top it up and top it up. I actually damaged the radiator inside my old Concorde once. Hit a rock and damaged it. I managed to get it connected back together, but I had to replace the full radiator. It was not working properly. So I had to buy distilled water and pour it in constantly to make sure that my car wouldn't overheat. Well, I had to take the radiator cap off. And again, it's one of those things where you put up on the engine bay, and just like refilling your oil under the engine or even sometimes putting washer fluid in, you forget to put it back. So someone like Stanley, who founded Radiator Springs in the car series, would sell you a new radiator cap. But then we got companies like Louis Lejeune Limited of England, one of the only surviving companies still making radiator caps. Because today, we don't need tons of them. They're manufactured by aftermarket companies for your vehicle, and literally, in today's world, you're lucky if you find 1 out of 1,000 people that would actually pop open their radiator and top it up. Everyone else just gets car dealerships and fluid refill stations and anyone else to do it for them. So we're less likely to lose them. But there are companies that still make them. On top of losing it, unless it was made out of full-scale brass, some of them were made out of lighter gauge steel, aluminum, they would crack, freeze up in the winter and snap, overheat and crack, so you'd have to replace it as well. And then there was also the automotive theft. People going by, stealing them and selling them back to people. You have to remember, this is a time where it was so easy to steal something like that and get away with it because it literally was exposed on the outside of your vehicle. So you could steal it so easily, build up a collection and turn around and start selling them. Hell, you could sell it back to the same person you stole it from, making a profit off of it. People still do this today, but stealing a radiator cap is not something that you would think to do. In the early days, like I said, these companies like Boyce Motometer started adding figures to it. Like I said, it's the aftermarket industry. And the aftermarket industry likes to personalize things for people. People started asking if they could get something else on it. They didn't just want their radiator cap. They didn't want a flat, boring, bland cap. They wanted it rounded. They wanted a curve. They wanted it to almost look like a boob. Trust me, some of them actually did. And a lot of the early ones took inspiration from either animals or sex symbols. Yes. Rolls-Royce, common since 1911, has had the winged female on the front of their vehicle, known as the Spirit of Ecstasy. Ooh, it's like hitting that top point while you're in bed. Yeah, rising to the top and hitting that ecstasy moment. That's what Rolls-Royce did. And like I said, some of them had animals as well. You wanted something powerful. And consumers were demanding this from their hood ornaments. These companies, like Boyce Motometer, set up in 1912, was issued a patent for an indicator for the car's coolant on the cap. This was a game changer. And during the 1920s, Boyce Motometer became one of the largest manufacturers of radiator caps in the world, with over 1,800 employees across the United States, England, in Canada, Australia, France, and Germany by having a gauge on it to tell you where your coolant level was. Today, we have that on our digital screens popping up. Hell, a lot of my older cars have a temperature gauge. Some of the older cars actually had a gauge for your coolant. It would tell you to fill it like your washer fluid. In 1912, the very first one came out, and it made it so people can actually check their own coolant levels, so they knew when to do it. You have to remember, you had to check your coolant constantly. Early vehicles didn't have a water pump used for the circulation system. Back then, it was based off a thermosiphon principle. And with that, there's a lot of possibilities for loss of fluid. Having the pump to bring it around, as in today's society, allows it to flow through the entire radiator to cool it off and into the system to keep your engine bay cold. Well, cold enough so that it doesn't blow up. Trust me, I've had a radiator go. My little 5-speed go-kart in the garage, within the first couple months of owning it, I had my radiator blow. And I know what happens. When your coolant is about to go, and your radiator is literally about to kick the bucket, coolant gives off a scent. You know how they pump in, because natural gas coming into your house is odorless. They add the rotten egg smell to it so you know if it's leaking. Coolant has that as well. And I learned this the hard way. It smells like cotton candy. I'm literally sitting there going from the 400 onto the 401 on the off-ramp. Luckily, I was over towards the side where the emergency lane is, and it was summertime, so there was no snowbank. And I'm sitting there, and my wife and I, well, girlfriend at the time, on the off-ramp, and I'm sitting there not even realizing that my temperature gauge is going up and up and up and up because the fan had died behind my radiator. So the fan wasn't able to cool the radiator. And when the radiator can't cool, it gets hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter. Right before it blows, it gives off this scent of cotton candy. I'm literally sitting there going, oh, there must be like a carnival or something nearby. I smell cotton candy. And seconds later, I just see white smoke billowing from underneath my hood, just coming out. I pull off to the side, I pop the hood, and all I can see is psh, blowing out. I'm like, shit, I just blew a rad. I look down, my fan's not running. I'm like, no, I didn't blow a rad. My fan went, and my rad overheated. What do I do? Well, luckily at the next exit, once I got the car cold enough, I managed to cruise along, get onto the 401, and manage to stay at a decent rate of speed to keep myself going. Because as long as I kept moving, the cold air rushing in would cool my radiator to a point that it wouldn't blow. The next exit, there was a Canadian Tire. I went in, got some rad stop. Same thing I did with the rad that I dented on my Concorde. Put some rad stop in, ran it through, make sure that the system would not blow again, filled it up with a ton of coolant, brought some extra coolant, and managed to get back onto the highway after my car had completely cooled down. And I decided to take roads that I knew would not be covered in tons of traffic. And since it was a weekend, and a long weekend, I was shit out of luck for getting this thing fixed. So I literally had to drive all the way to my in-laws like this. And then I had to drive all the way home that way. As long as I was maintaining at least 50 kilometers an hour at a steady rate of speed on the highway, I didn't have to worry about my radiator blowing up again. It was cooling itself through cold air rushing in. The fan was made to kick on when you were in stop-and-go traffic to keep the radiator from blowing. My fan blew. Cost me a fortune because Kia, they're cheap cars, but when you have to replace their parts, they cost a ton of money. So, yeah. Luckily, I didn't use my radiator cap, but my radiator cap didn't have a logo on it. Had I have had the temperature gauge on it, which I did because it was on my dash, if I'd been paying attention, I wouldn't have had that problem. Now, hood ornaments, getting back to the original topic of this podcast, hood ornaments were big business. During the early days of the Ford Model T, when it came out, in the teen years, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and into the 50s, hood ornaments could be found on tons of vehicles, especially through the 20s and 30s when radiators were exposed on vehicles. Everybody wanted to personalize their vehicle. It didn't matter if you're driving a crappy, beat-up Ford Model T. You wanted to put your own logo on the hood. Similar to how you can do this with Rolls-Royce today, but we'll get into that at a later point. So all these car companies were rushing to do this. And even in the late 30s and into the 40s, how they changed from an exposed radiator to an integrated radiator with a grill in front of it, they started moving the radiator cap hood ornaments onto the actual hood. But why did we lose them? Well, by the time the 60s came in, brand new regulations were starting to come out. And they were starting to change the way we dealt with hood ornaments. New regulations came into play and started changing the way we had hood ornaments. In 1968, the U.S. introduced a new regulation on hood ornaments for pedestrian safety. Kind of like how in Europe now, the Tesla Cybertruck can't be sold because its angular design and the weight of the vehicle is too dangerous for pedestrians. In 68, the Americans thought that hood ornaments were dangerous for pedestrians. If they got hit, they'd found over the previous decades, people can get impaled on some of the ones that they had. The Cadillac wreath was literally sitting right up there with pointed edges. Hell, even the Pontiac Ottawa leader was a pointed edge. People can get hurt by them. So this, along with any spinner wheel protrusions, were getting banned in the United States. And they were doing this to keep people safe. Not the vehicles, not the people in the vehicles, but pedestrians when they got hit by vehicles. Now we know, way back in the 1920s and 30s, you were able to buy a pedestrian catcher for the front of your vehicle, so instead of them getting impaled or run over, you could just literally catch them and keep driving. This actually was a cool thing that was available in early safety features. It was an aftermarket thing. This didn't stop every single person from doing this. We still actually had hood ornaments. But what they did is a lot of car companies, after getting the wheel protrusions taken off, because if you remember James Bond and how he tore up the tire of a Ford Mustang in Goldfinger by using those little wheel protrusions they have in the Aston Martins, things like that, they got rid of. But the hood ornaments we didn't get rid of. We just changed them to a spring-loaded hood ornament. So if a pedestrian got hit, they could bend them over. A lot of the car companies that had made ones that were pointed and could damage people, like literally impale anybody, even by rubbing their hand over it, a lot of car companies started moving away from those. And that's how we started moving into getting personalized logos embedded in the grills of automobiles. Hood ornaments were there in the original context to cover our radiator caps. And by the 40s, they moved onto the hood of the vehicle because we still needed to tell you the difference between buying a Ford, a Pontiac, a Rolls-Royce, a Cadillac. Hell, not everybody can tell a vehicle apart from something else. So they needed to differentiate themselves. And that's how logos came into play. The hood ornaments essentially became logos for car companies. A lot of them moving onto either the hood or into the front grille of the vehicles. But like we said, we had some that were spring-loaded. The 1973 Thunderbird, the 74 AMC Ambassador, and hell, even the 86 Jeep Wagoneer. They were all spring-loaded. And that's actually how Rolls-Royce does theirs today. It's spring-loaded, but if you try and touch it, it's spring-loaded and will disappear underneath the hood. You can't tear them off. So no matter what you do, you cannot steal the Spirit of Ecstasy on a Rolls-Royce. It'll sit there begging you to come over and take it, but the second you touch it, it disappears. And Rolls-Royce has done this to ensure that people don't take them. Unfortunately, companies like Mercedes were not doing this. And if you've watched the movie Mrs. Doubtfire with the great Robin Williams in it, he literally rips the Mercedes logo off Pierce Brosnan's character's car in the movie. He also kind of makes a sexual joke, kind of saying, if you have to buy a fancy car like that, you're kind of trying to overcompensate for something else. It was funny. It went over my head when I first watched it as a kid, but you're a kid. You don't understand any of that context. People that think kids that do, they got bigger issues, but we're not talking cars here. By 1974, the European Union changed the rules so that all new cars would have to conform to the same rule as the Americans. The Rolls-Royce Spirit of Ecstasy is now a spring-loaded system. Like we said, it retracts underneath the hood. Aftermarket ornaments had to have a breakaway nylon fixings to comply with the new EC Directive of 1974, or as they call it, the EC Directive 74/483 for the European Union. So any new hood ornament that you wanted on your vehicle had to be a breakaway option, or in the case of Rolls-Royce, had to be spring-loaded and disappear so that it would not harm any pedestrians. Well, even though by 1968 is when they put this into play, it was really going after just luxury makes. Because by the 1950s, hood ornaments started disappearing. And like we said, this was all due to what happened during the 1930s as radiators became integrated into the design. We moved down from a hood to the grille. And as that happened, we embedded the logo into the front bumpers, the grills, the hoods, and all that. These were essentially kept, with some replacing them with flat-mounted symbols in their place, like Mercedes-Benz and BMW. Today, you don't find a hood ornament of a Mercedes-Benz logo sticking out of the hood like you did during the 1990s, like in Mrs. Doubtfire. No, they have a logo, a giant one in the front grille, and then one right on the hood, which is there to to replace the old hood ornament that used to stick out. Rolls-Royce and Bentley, even after all of this, became the two companies that managed to keep them going. And even up until today, Rolls-Royce is one of the last to have kept them. They did start making a comeback during the 1980s, and like we said, with my 90 New Yorker, it had to literally blow apart so that nobody can hurt themselves on it. Trust me, I went and touched it, and it would move back and forth. I could not rip the thing out, because the one on the Chrysler one was a lot better than Mercedes. You literally couldn't rip it out because it was actually attached by a spring underneath. It would flap back and forth, but it would not rip out. It was great. Chrysler actually put more thought into it than Mercedes did. Kind of funny. So during the 80s and 90s, hood ornaments were making a comeback, and you'd see them on companies' top products only. So these are the products that insinuate top luxury. These were the premier or high-end brands, or from even the American counterparts, they're top tier of luxury, where you're moving more into the bottom end of premier or the top end of luxury, kind of like the Lincoln Continental or Chrysler Imperials of the past. Like I said, it was my New Yorker that had it. You didn't find them on other Chrysler products. You found it only on the top tier product, a New Yorker, Fifth Avenue, because the standard New Yorker just had it right in the front grille. But by the early 2000s, they were disappearing. And again, it was due to regulations and costs. A lot of new car companies started doing away with it because they were an extra accessory. And they found that by putting just a logo on the front grille or on top of the hood, anyone could just figure out what it is. But it's also a time in the early 2000s when a lot of car companies started experimenting by designing their own dedicated fronts. How BMW had their kidney-style grille for decades beforehand. New car companies, and even existing ones, were starting to make a point for themselves by creating grilles of their own context. They wanted to create their own dedicated design. Whereas you see all Audis today all look like each other. This is at the auto show in Toronto, and trust me, seeing an A3, an A4, or an A5, there's not much of a difference between any of them. And I got a few of them wrong. Even myself, the guy who sees these all the time, got a few of them wrong because of making their vehicles a dedicated design. And people were actually able to see the vehicles by the grille from far away. So there was no need for a hood ornament to stand out and showcase the prowess of the vehicle to anyone else. Mercedes did away with their hood ornament. Chrysler had gotten away from it by the mid-90s. Cadillac had moved it onto the grille. And even Jaguar had moved to its own tiny emblem. The leaping Jaguar was gone. A great time in the 80s and 90s when we had the Cadillac crest, the Lincoln pointed star, the Mercedes star, or even the Chrysler Pentagon on our hoods was now gone, with Rolls-Royce being the only product sold in North America that had a hood ornament. We had a lot in the past. Hell, Wolseley from Great Britain was one of the first car companies ever to create an illuminated logo on the front of their vehicle because they wanted to make sure you could see their vehicles from miles away. And over the years, we've had some great ones. The Pierce Arrow Archer, Pontiac Ottawa Leader, the Cadillac Crest Wreath, the Bentley Flying Bee, the Horch Ball with Wings, Jaguar's Leaping Cat, Peugeot the Lion Rampart, AMC the Jumping Marlin, Oldsmobile had the Rocket. That was a good one. One of my favorites, and the one I remember the most from being a kid, was the Dodge Ram head. In the 1980s, any new Dodge Ram had literally a ram head sticking out of the hood, similar to Mack trucks and their Bulldog. Rolls-Royce with the Spirit of Ecstasy, the Hispano-Suiza Stork, Mercedes three-pointed star, the Buick Tri-Shields. They were all there. Some models even had dedicated ones, like the Buick Regal, the Chevrolet Impala, Jeep Grand Wagoneer, Chrysler Cordoba, and the Ford Thunderbird all had their own dedicated hood ornaments. But today, they don't. They have their own dedicated logos, because hood ornaments are gone. New safety rules keep people from making them. And throughout the years, they've been made with different materials. Brass, zinc, bronze. Hell, it'd be chrome-plated. Silver and nickel-plated was substituted sometimes for chrome. Even made out of glass. Even made from diamond or quartz, plexiglass, plastic. My Chrysler one was plastic. 1950, the Ford Custom Deluxe was one of the first ones ever made in plexiglass. And from 55, the old Pontiac Ottawa Leader, or the Native American head that they had in the front of the Pontiacs, lit up. Diamonds were very appealing to some of these car companies, but as theft continued, a lot of them later switched to either plastic or quartz to ensure that people wouldn't be stealing them because they're not as valuable. One of the most valuable ones throughout history was the Nash inch petty hood ornament. It is the most sought after one for reproduction or an original flying lady ones, commanding thousands of dollars for original ones. Hell, there are hundreds of dollars even for reproduction ones. And this is from Nash, a little car company from America that never really made it big. Nash. Remember Nash? The Metropolitan, that first microcar built for the North American marketplace? Yeah. Their hood ornament, the Flying Lady, is the most sought after one. And trust me, when you see it, you'll understand why. It was a great piece of art. And during the Art Deco period, we saw some amazing designs and some great things come out of the automotive industry. The aftermarket industry was alive. Personalization with our own logos. Having them made for your own vehicle. Having a bear on the front to show that you're big and mean. You can have a sexy lady. Hell, it might even be your wife on the front. Or just somebody you literally love, like a superstar. It was one of the earliest forms of aftermarket modification for vehicles. And it was one of the cheapest and easiest ones for anyone to do. From the early days of putting a heat meter on the radiator cap, to adding our own logos and sculptures. The hood ornament has gone through a massive amount of time and has changed. And even today, hardly any car company still makes them. We could still expect Rolls-Royce to keep pushing out the spirit of ecstasy. And the greatest thing with Rolls-Royce is their personalization effects for their vehicles allow you to make your own. Rolls-Royce does this. Drake actually has his company's owl as a replacement for the spirit of ecstasy on his own Rolls-Royce. He had it changed because Rolls-Royce knows everybody knows the appeal of their vehicle, and that massive radiator style grille is synonymous with Rolls-Royce. That changing the spirit of ecstasy to Drake's own personal logo is something that they're willing to do. And why? Because he's willing to pay for it. The sculpture of his owl costs thousands of dollars because it's real crystal. Why do you think you don't see him rolling around in his Rolls a lot? Because how expensive it is. The hood ornament, it came because there was a use for it and because we wanted to personalize our vehicles from everyone else. It went because of new regulations for pedestrian safety. And even though today you could still make them and put them on vehicles, car companies shy away from it because it's an extra expense at a point in time where it costs too much to do anything to build a vehicle. You could still buy them today as a personalization effect for your own vehicle. But most people are opting for those cheap plastic air vents or stupid stickers instead of a personalization hood ornament. I really like old plastic Chrysler logo on the front of my New Yorker. I thought it made the car look even more luxurious than anything else. A hood ornament stands out and tells you that it's true luxury. And unfortunately, in today's market, that's something that's lost. So any of the automotive companies out there listening to my podcast right now, maybe you guys should invest some money and create some new hood ornaments. Because trust me, there are consumers out there that would like it as an option. So what do you think of the hood ornament? Do you like it? Do you think we should have it? Do you think they should bring it back? Or do you think it really is something that was just part of a fad and ran its course through the automotive time periods? Well, whatever you think, send us an email, send us a comment, and remember to like, share, or comment about this podcast on any of the major social feeds or streaming sites that you found the AutoLooks podcast on. Send us an email over at email@autolooks.net and tell us what you think about the automotive hood ornaments and how maybe some of these car companies in existence should bring them back. I get it, Cadillac's trying to change with the times, but putting even the new center of their old wreath, which is kind of funny because it looks like if you've ever seen M Grand from Geely, it looks exactly like their logo. So, and tell us about it. Do you think they should come back? And after that, stop by the website, read some of the reviews, check out some of the ratings, go to the Corporate Links website page, big or small, we have them all on the autolooks.net Corporate Links website page at autolooks.net. The AutoLooks podcast is brought to you by Ecom Entertainment Group and distributed by podbeam.com. If you'd like to get in touch with us, send us an email over at email@autolooks.net. So for myself, Everett J, the whole AutoLooks team here in Ecom Entertainment Group, strap yourself in for this one fun, wild ride that the automotive world's going to take us on.